Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Sales Show. So, I'm going to be really honest in this episode. The first quarter of 2024 has honestly been, and I warn you, I'm going to swear, a shit show. like, it's not even just the first quarter, it's all started in December. Just illness after illness. I started my really intense marathon training, I ramped it up a notch in January. I got 2/3 through the plan. Then I got injured. And when I got injured, it triggered a big mental health dip. And then I got COVID. Suffice to say, when I set my intentions at the beginning or at the end of 2023, one of my intentions was I am done with surviving. I'm ready to thrive. And we were just plunged straight back in to survival mode. And honestly, it didn't feel like a little bit into April until I finally felt like this is my new year. I'm getting my mojo back. I can really, really feel it. So obviously, if you have been following along with the podcast, if you've been following along with my emails, with the stuff I've been launching, the stuff I've been up to, you might be surprised to hear me say all of this. And this is why I want to talk about it more, because this is real life. Most of the stuff that had happened that made it feel hard for me in the first quarter of 2024 is stuff that really is outside of my control. Health stuff, health stuff with my son, the injury, all of that stuff. And it's real life stuff that we have to deal with. No amount of positive thinking is going to stop me from getting COVID, right? It hasn't all been bad, but it has felt very hard. I've felt on the back foot the whole year. I didn't even get to wrap up my work year last year, and I felt on the back foot, and I felt at times very overwhelmed, especially when I've felt ill. It's often triggers a lot of overwhelm for me. And let's just say it's far from my ideal version of the year. And I cannot believe it is May already. It's scary how kind of fast the year has gone. And I think some of the feelings I have around that are because of how rubbish the first quarter of the year has been. So yeah, I want to talk about it more. I want to be honest about the fact that this has been happening behind the scenes. And I want to talk about how I navigate this stuff. And it really does feel like these days I have to be more and more mindful of navigating this stuff than ever before. Because if you don't know, I also have chronic fatigue. It's doing a lot better, and my body was responding really, really well to the marathon training, apart from the injury, but that was not related to the fatigue. But I do have to be very, very mindful of what I'm taking on and how I'm working, because it could just flare at any time. So yeah, I just want to be honest about the fact that it's happened and how I deal with it. How have I kept showing up and selling despite feeling like the first quarter of the year really has been a shit show? So firstly, I just want to talk about the various reasons that we can struggle. I think that one of the things, and this is very, very true for me, especially as a business coach, one of the tricky mental spirals we can get ourselves into when we are struggling is that, we're not just in the struggle that we're currently in, but we're also making that struggle mean something about us. So for me as a business coach, and especially someone who talks a lot about finding your version of ease and rest and taking care of yourself and all of that, if I am struggling and overwhelmed and doing everything last minute and feeling really chaotic behind the scenes, it can make me feel really fraudy and imposter syndrome and I'm not good enough. And if I can't do it, then how can I even help anyone else? I mean, that is not true. And I can say this now, it is absolutely not true. But sometimes when you're in the thick of it and in the moment, it's really easy to spiral and make our struggles mean even more about ourselves. Why am I like this? I know that those of you with, chronic health stuff or mental health stuff will probably relate to that kind of feeling. That is definitely something that comes up for me regularly, and I really have to keep it in check. The truth is that some of us do have probably, we find certain things harder that other people would find easy, and that's just the way it is. We've got to be kind to ourselves. The fact that we find it harder and we continue anyway means that we are actually a lot stronger than we think. And sometimes there might be life stuff going on. Sometimes there might be health stuff going on. Sometimes there isn't even necessarily a good reason for the struggle. And I say like good reason in quotes, because if you are struggling, you are struggling. You don't actually need a good reason. Maybe you are just burned out. Maybe you are burned out from selling, delivering. Maybe you're burned out from, some disappointments that you've had. We all need a break sometimes. There is nothing wrong with struggling. There is nothing wrong with needing a break. And yeah, I just feel really, really strongly about the importance of self-compassion, basically, in this conversation. We all go through this stuff. It's just that we don't always talk about it. I'm not going to come on Instagram and talk about my deepest, darkest fears when I'm in the depth of the struggle. And by the way, I don't know if anyone relates to this, but when I've had COVID, it has really triggered very, very negative thinking about my business and about my life. I'm not necessarily going to come on and share that in the moment, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. And we just need to remember that we're seeing everyone's curated highlights. Everyone has this stuff behind the scenes. Sometimes I think also we might just be feeling off and we are resisting it and resisting it and resisting it. And instead of just giving ourselves a break and giving ourselves a little bit of rest, which is actually sometimes all we need, we are pushing through and things become and feel a lot more bigger than they really are. What else do I want to say about this? I think the only other thing that I really want to say about the feelings is that sometimes when you are in a period of struggle, maybe you are tired, maybe you are sad, maybe you are whatever you are feeling, it's really, really easy for that to skew the whole picture we have in our minds of how we are doing in our life and business. Kind of like what I just said about how COVID really skewed my thoughts. Be really careful not to turn what is happening right now into a truth about your whole entire life and business. Whatever season you are in your business right now does not dictate the future success of your business, okay? I promise you it doesn't. It may really, really feel like it does, but it doesn't. And I am definitely, with the point I'm about to say now, I am not minimizing any feelings. We are all about feeling the feelings. We are not about toxic positivity here at all. And I do want to say there probably is also a lesson in the struggle you are going through right now. And sometimes that is quite comforting to me to consider that I might not know what the lesson is right now, but there will be a lesson I can take from it. Okay, so that's what I want to say about the feelings. Really, the most important thing is self-compassion, and we all have this stuff. I work with people I tend to attract a lot of neurodivergent people with mental health issues, physical health, chronic illness, caregiving responsibilities, young kids, all of these kind of life situations. And I can tell you, all of my clients go through periods where they are struggling, and sometimes they give themselves the rest they need and they can't quite seem to shake it. And it's just part of the journey. It's part of the process. It's really, really normal. Okay, so let me talk about the practical stuff that has really seen me through these times. And I will start by saying that because of my experience with my chronic illness, I have been very mindful of knowing that I cannot expect myself to deliver in the moment all the time. I cannot expect myself always to, be able to plan everything out far in advance and be able to deliver and all that stuff. I just can't. So I have been really mindful of that for quite a long time. So I have been putting systems into place to help with that. Now, they still have many, many improvements that need to be made to them, but I will say it has been helpful. And actually, a while ago, for my, earlier iteration of my podcast, the Quietly Ambitious podcast, I interviewed my mastermind sister, Willemijn Maas, who is an OBM. And we talked a lot about outsourcing. And really one of the key messages that she shared in that episode, and I'll make sure I link to it in the show notes, was to design your business in a way that it's okay if you're not in it sometimes. She definitely said it in a better way than that, but it has really stuck with me. And I would say in terms of overarching goals and the way I set things up behind the scenes and the way I plan to improve things behind the scenes, I would say that I always have that in my mind. It's always a filter. It's always a guiding principle, I guess, to be able to set up my business in a way that I don't always have to be there. Now, obviously, my business is very much run around me as the brand, as the face, as the coach. You know, I'm there with my clients, even in my lower touch memberships and stuff. But there's so much that can happen without me physically being there. There's so much that can still happen in terms of selling my offers without me necessarily needing to be there, be visible all the time. So yeah, I will make sure I link to that episode in the show notes. Okay, so here is what makes it possible for me to sell when I am struggling. Really, the number one thing I would say that has supported me is repurposing and relaunching. Repurposing and relaunching. So I have several offers at this point, and it's so easy to just think I need to create something new, or everyone in my audience who was going to buy that offer would have already bought by now, so I need to create something new. Things have shifted for me dramatically since I started relaunching my offers over and over again and repurposing the content that I had used for previous launches. Really, really powerful shift in my business. Now, obviously, it really helps to have certain systems behind the scenes. I've been working on finding the right system for me for quite a long time. Most recently, I've been using Moira Fuller's Marketing Goldmine Airtable. I interviewed her recently in another episode, so you can go and listen to that. And I've been going through my old emails, I've been categorizing them and coming up with a better system. Before that, I had a very rudimentary system and by the way, even a rudimentary system works, right? But I was I had a Google Doc, and it would have like subheadings of different launches and different years and months. And I would just have like the date, the subject line, and a link to the email in my email marketing system. So even that is a system for you to keep track that makes it easier for you to repurpose in future. And don't think you need to go back and go over all your past content. The best place to get started is with your content from now going forward. Then if you have some downtime, you can then go back and fill it in with backdated stuff. You can also just search your past broadcast emails for topics in the subject line and find content that way. You can scroll through social media feeds and find posts that you wrote around the time that you've launched something before. Yeah, that is my system for repurposing. I think also what is really important about selling when you are going through a period of struggle is to make sure that you really trust yourself to deliver the offer. If there is something that's really, really high touch and you don't trust yourself to deliver, firstly ask yourself if there's some sort of clause you could add. So I'm thinking about service providers here. I'm sure that there is some sort of clause you could add if you have to take time off. I work with one-to-one Voxer coaching clients, and if I have to take some time off, I just add it on to the end of their package, and that works really, really well. I mainly use it for things like bank holidays or school holidays, or if I'm going on holiday. But if I felt really overwhelmed and overloaded, I would absolutely do that, and my clients would understand, and that's all in the contract. So having that in mind, but also maybe it can help you decide between different offers, and you realize that actually, you know what, I want to sell the lower touch one, and I trust myself to deliver that better. Also, one thing I will say here is that if you tend to be an over deliverer, you got to rein yourself back. You've got to be really, really honest with yourself. It's much better to under promise and over deliver than it is to over promise and stretch yourself and burn yourself out to deliver. So I rein myself in all the time. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I have a list of all the things I'm adding to something, and I have to force myself to delete stuff. It's just, it's my natural way, but I'm getting so much better at judging what is within my capacity, I suppose. And just to follow on from that, sometimes you will get it wrong. Sometimes you will over deliver. Sometimes you'll realize I didn't have capacity for that. It's all a learning experience. I genuinely believe, it's that thing Marie Forleo says, isn't it? Everything is figure outable. I really genuinely believe that. So if you do end up having to postpone something, push something back, it's all figure outable. And actually that brings me to another point, which is, it's okay to reschedule. It's okay to postpone. I personally find it very, very permission giving when I see coaches and mentors I look up to rescheduling and being honest about, like, you know what, I'm overloaded, or the family's ill, or whatever, it's being postponed. It's so permission giving to me. And that's absolutely the permission I want to give you as well. Like, it's totally okay. Sometimes we can tie ourselves up in knots about postponing something because we think it's not professional. We think people will be annoyed. all of those things are stories. I think what we have to tune into is how can I best support myself to deliver the best work for them? How can I most be of service? Sometimes that means postponing something. It really is okay. So repurposing, relaunching systems, trusting yourself to deliver the offer. Oh yeah, boundaries and support, I think really, really helpful. I think I touched on boundaries really by saying about the over-delivering thing and reining yourself in. But if you find that things aren't working for you, you get to be clearer in your boundaries. Sometimes I can get to a space where I'm checking in with my one-to-one clients outside of work hours. I love chatting to them about their businesses, and it's easy for me to do in many ways. But what I realize is it actually drains me, and it means that I don't give myself total rest from it. It's really, really important. Like, rest doesn't mean just not doing the thing. It also means not thinking about the thing. So boundaries for me will look like really enforcing those working hours, like being okay with replying to them the next day if that's what they need. I tend to be actually very present in Voxer, but technically in the contract, it says I will check in twice a day minimum and that they will receive a reply within 24 hours on working days. That almost never happens. Like almost always, I will reply within a couple of hours, but it's good to know that the boundaries are there if I need them. I also block notifications on my phone. Most recently, I've deleted social media apps from my phone. I don't have notifications on Voxer, so I have to manually go in there and check if I want to. And having support just makes it really, really easier to see what you're missing in terms of where you could use stronger boundaries and the feelings and stories that are coming up as a result. I think that how this relates specifically to selling is that you want to feel confident selling your offer. If a part of you just wants as many people as you can get in an offer, but another part of you is afraid that they will overstep your boundaries, that you'll burn yourself out, then those parts are going to be at war with each other when you are selling. So having the stronger boundaries, having time to properly rest, having the support you need to figure out the best way for you is going to help you to sell more in these times. So I would say that's the practical stuff. But really, the final thing I want to say, and I think I said this to a client on Voxer recently, is that sometimes there's just nothing you can do. Sometimes something comes up and you haven't planned ahead and you haven't got stuff to repurpose. You just can't. And it is hard and it sucks. But what I want to say about these times is that the hardest thing to do is surrender in the times when surrender is what you most need. So I could probably do a whole other episode about this, but basically there's a cycle of, if you follow like the menstrual cycle or the lunar cycle, there's different phases where we're feeling more visible and more productive and more energetic, and then we're feeling more inwards and more like we need more rest and all of this stuff. There's all these cycles, and like in nature, there's, winter, the seasons. Seasons would have been a good way to describe it, right? When, the leaves fall off the trees, nothing's growing, everything's kind of just holding on and waiting for the spring, right? And there is stuff happening behind, like under the surface. And Kate Northrup, by the way, talks about this so well, especially in her book, Do Less. There is stuff happening under the ground. There are things going on. The preparation is happening for the spring so that everything can spring back to life when the spring comes. But it's really, really hard to see it. And it requires a lot of trust, which is why the surrender is so hard. But I can promise you that you will get so much more rest and you will gain so much more from allowing yourself to trust that it's okay and that you get to pause, you get to surrender, and you just have to have that trust that it's going to come back versus pushing through, pushing. No, I can't accept this. I'm going to keep pushing. I feel like I did not say that in a very like poetic way, but I hope that the point is clear. The times when we need surrender most are the times where it actually feels hardest to surrender, because it requires a lot of trust that you are going to come out the other side and that, stuff is happening under the surface, that maybe there is a lesson to be learned, even if that lesson is just to clear your schedule more or set up those systems, whatever. You are going to come out of it, I promise you. But sometimes all you can do in the moment is surrender. I think there's also something to be said for tracking your money, being on top of your money and knowing where you are financially, because a lot of the time it can feel very unsafe to just stop and surrender. And knowing your numbers will help you to decide whether it really is unsafe or whether there's a bit of a wiggle room there as well. And again, I could have a whole other episode about tracking. But yeah, that is what comes to mind for me today. I didn't totally plan out this episode. That's just what's on my mind and has been on my mind, especially in the first quarter of this year. And like I said, if you are struggling, please be kind to yourself. We all have these times when we are struggling. Something I didn't say actually, that I probably should have said when I was talking about the feelings, is that you don't have to be high vibe and energetic to sell. You can be tired, you can be ill, you can be mentally ill and still sell and still make a lot of money. It's been really helpful for me to take that on as a belief. Really, really helpful. Because my mood affects me a lot, in terms of like how I'm showing up and talking. And I've decided that I still get to, share vulnerable and honest stuff. I don't have to share all from my wounds, but, I still get to share stuff that speaks to people is what I mean. And sometimes I'm more energetic and silly and excited, and sometimes I'm more, level or maybe a bit sad, but I can still make money either way. So that has been really helpful as well. And if you are struggling, I see you, I feel you, you will get through it. And as hard as it is, you just got to surrender and trust that. Okay, I hope that this has been helpful. It's helpful for me just to be honest about it. We don't need to pretend that everything's perfect, because it's not, and that's life. But yeah, I'll catch you again soon for another episode of the Soulful Sales Show.